Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, Professor Thorgy, your guide to all things geeky, and welcome to another episode of Comic Class, the show every single week on this channel where we just geek out about comic books. And today is a monumental occasion for the world of comic books. Today, something huge is happening. Because today, Iron Man number 600 is being released. I know you might be thinking, oh, it's a monumental day because 600 is a very large and important number. And yes, it is indeed a large and important number, but that's not what we're talking about today. The reason why that issue is so important is not because, hey, a major character hit another landmark issue. Hooray for them. Although seriously, hooray for Iron Man, that is very important. The reason why that issue is so big is because it is Brian Michael Bendis' final Marvel comic. Asterisk until he eventually returns one day, because that's how comics work. Nobody stays at one company forever. Yes, after today, Brian Michael Bendis will be solely working at DC Comics. That is huge because he has been working at Marvel for roughly 20 years at this point. I had to give an extra head bob to that years because that's how huge that is. It's because people have worked at Marvel for 20 years. They've worked there for longer than 20 years. But they would typically wander around a little bit, go over to DC, do a little project over there while they work at both companies at the same time, maybe leave to do their own indie thing for a little while. Bendis didn't do that. Bendis, who even had his own indie thing going, picked up his indie thing, brought it to Marvel, and plopped it down his desk, then planted his flag squarely on that desk and said, "Nobody touch this flag. This flag is mine." He never even stepped foot outside of the building for fear that someone would come and touch that flag. He was stuck at Marvel and he said, "I am never leaving." Today is the day that he left. That is insane to me that that is actually finally happening. So today on Comic Class, I thought, you know what? Let's take a look back at the impact that he made at Marvel Comics. But not just at Marvel, but at comics in general. And I know people are going to think, oh, so you're going to talk about some of his negatives because you like to rant about Brian Michael Bendis. Yeah, I'm not going to hide it. I am not the biggest fan of stuff that he's been doing over the past couple of years. There's a lot of things that he does specifically in his books that I'm not really the biggest fan of. But I've already talked about that before, and this is his last day at Marvel. Why on earth would I come in here and just make another big old ranting video about Brian Michael Bendis? I don't even know what my finger's doing right now. I wanted to shake it back and forth. This was like a helicopter with one of the blades like missing a screw in it. Yeah, why would I come in here and just wag my finger at the guy on his last day? Plus, it's kind of just stupid for me to come in here on a day when everyone else is celebrating him and be like, well, I want to talk about my problems with issue number 49 of New Avengers. No, that's stupid. That's dumb. Why you gotta bring up old stuff? This is a guy who made a huge impact on the comic book world with his time at Marvel Comics, and I don't think people really give him enough credit for it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people who give him credit. I remember when they said he was going to be leaving Marvel, so many people came in here and said, oh my goodness, what is Marvel going to do? Because they had this weird feeling like Brian Michael Bendis was the only guy that worked there, and everyone still thought he had a perfect track record. Yeah, man, it's going to be okay. We've already seen other rising stars start to come in here and take his place. Honey Case. You Rosenberg, I actually choked on that last one. But no, there are other people out there who really only know a lot of his more recent stuff, or who don't really know what comics were like before Brian Michael Bendis came around, and they don't realize how much of the modern landscape of comics is all kind of thanks to Brian Michael Bendis. So I just kind of wanted to come in here and just say, hey man, listen, even if I have ranted about this guy in the past, I gotta tip my hat to what he did at Marvel and the impact that he left on the comic book industry. I kind of just want to run down a brief little list of some of the major accomplishments that I think that he pulled off at Marvel that really did change comics. Most of the times for the better. Now, when talking about Brian Michael Bendis' run at Marvel, the place where you really have to begin, and the thing that many people are going to point to as probably his greatest creation while he was there, is Ultimate Spider-Man. In the year 2000, Marvel said they wanted to create an alternate reality, an alternate line of books that basically took these characters and said, what if they were created today? What if we fully updated these characters? Which is a brilliant idea, because they put brilliant people on it. This could have just gone nowhere, in all honesty, because we have seen so many series out there where they come in and say, oh, it's Spider-Man, but his origin has been updated. They have tried that many times with different series, and it never really stuck. I remember when I was a kid, they tried to do that with John Byrne. He came in here with a book called Spider-Man Chapter 1, and yeah, it was just a really poor retelling of his origin. I was like, yeah, I kind of already know all this stuff, and all the stuff you're doing to update it just kind of makes it seem dated, even when I'm reading it. They came in here and said, no, we're not just going to tell the exact same stories. We're going to get new, young, fresh creators to come in here and tell these origin stories in the way that new, young, fresh creators tell stories these days, because Marvel at the time was realizing there was a huge change going on in comics. This was at a time in which the indie market was starting to explode. Indie comics were always a thing, but they were always kind of a niche thing. They were always kind of a thing that people in the know knew about. Like those people who, when you went into your comic book store, there was that one old guy with the big beard and a cigarette that was always like just half hanging on, like, yeah, let me tell you about Robert Crumb or the Fabulous Freak Brothers. Let me tell you about those books. This was during the period of time in which it was like, oh shoot, Image is not just doing Spawn now. There's actually some new stuff coming out of Image, which these days, that's all that Image is new, fresh, creative stuff. This was at the point in time in which people were starting to go, wait, whoa, what's that new guy over there doing? Not just the guys who have only been doing superhero comics their entire life. What's this guy up to, and what if we put him on a superhero book? Because Bendis, up until that point, the main thing that he was known for, and he had done some other stuff here and there, but the thing that really made him blow up was this series called Powers, which, yes, it is superhero related, but it's a story of cops that deal with superheroes. It was kind of a fresh, amazing new idea, partly because he treated it with the grit that a cop story should be treated with. It was one of the best examples of the, hey, we're going to do superheroes, but set in the real world. I've mentioned numerous times on this channel, I kind of hate when people attempt to do that because they never really do it well. This was an example of it being done very well. And Marvel decided to take that guy and put him on Spider-Man. But not just regular Spider-Man, no. It was a book that was meant to capture the spirit of young Spider-Man, of that teenage Spider-Man, just starting off, just learning his powers, just getting out there for the very first time. Listen, if you guys who are Spider-Man movie fans think that you're tired of seeing that over and over and over again, the Spider-Man comic book fans are tired of seeing that over and over and over again, and they were going to come in here and do it again, and yet Brian Michael Bendis made it work. And one of the reasons why he made it work is, A, he told it like a modern day story is told. It was not just make sure you get him in the tights as fast as possible and you have him go in there and start punching the Sandman as soon as you can. No, it was, hey, what's the really important stuff in stories these days? Is it the superhero action? Or is it the personal side? Is it the human side? Is it the adventures of Peter Parker? Bendis came in here and realized in order to make people love this version of Spider-Man, they had to love Peter Parker. And that is why it is so amazing to me that he came in here and tried to reinvent Spider-Man, reintroduce him to the world, and the way he did was by not even having him be in the Spider-Man outfit until like issue 5. Think about how amazing that is. I constantly talk on here about how important pacing is when it comes to your comic, because comics come out once a month and people are done reading them in 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, you kind of have to make this stuff move along. Bendis came in here with a new Spider-Man story, something we have seen before, so odds are we'd get tired of it really quick. And yet he came in here and went, no, take your time. If you look at the other book that came out at that time from the Ultimate line, the X-Men book, by the end of the first issue, they were assembled, they were in costume, we had introduced the villains, everything was moving along in that book. In this series, he wanted everybody to fall in love with Peter Parker, not Spider-Man, and that was a huge risk and it paid off. This was a book where you got to know Aunt May. This is a book where you got to know Uncle Ben, something that never really happens. Uncle Ben in the main continuity has always been that guy who came in and was like, Peter, here's an important lesson about this thing. Okay, now I'm fading from your memory, yay. Uncle Ben in the Ultimate Universe was a character. We actually got to know him. We got to like him, like Peter does, which made it so much bigger when he actually died. I remember at that time, this was before there was YouTube and the internet was ablaze with people talking about conspiracies about comics. At that time, if you wanted to know about comics, really all you could do was turn to Wizard Magazine. I remember at that time reading someone in Wizard Magazine talking about how, could they maybe like have Uncle Ben live in this timeline? Because we're on like issue 3 right now, and he's still sticking around, and I actually really like this version of Uncle Ben. Would it be okay if we kept him around? People were actually asking for Uncle Ben to live in a Spider-Man story, something I have never heard people asking for, because Bendis made people care. That is what he brought to the table on his Ultimate Spider-Man book. He was able to take the story of Peter Parker and interpret it into the modern comic book format, which was people, then powers. That's the important thing. I know people are going to say that's always been what it is. Yes, it has up to a point. As I said, this was a 6-issue arc on Spider-Man where he didn't even get in costume until issue 6. It was 90% people on his arc on Spider-Man, 10% powers. That's how he really spiced this all up. And he was able to actually make us really connect with these characters just in the way that he wrote dialogue. That's another thing that you have to talk about when you talk about Bendis. I know that I have come in here and complained about what I have called Bendis speak, because he has a very unique way of writing people's dialogue. However, when he first started, A, he wasn't doing his Bendis speak nearly as much as he does today, but also, that was a time when nobody did anything close to Bendis speak. I remember him talking about when he started working on Ultimate Spider-Man. Again, this was like in Wizard Magazine back in 2000 when this thing first began. He said he actually went into a high school, told them that he was writing a comic book about a character in high school, and he actually just asked the principal if he could maybe just walk the halls, just listen to people, which it's kind of weird that any principal would agree to that, but apparently they did. And he said that, yeah, he just wrote down the unique way that people talk. And I remember when I picked up his run on Spider-Man, just sitting there thinking, I have never seen characters talk like this. This is one of the most unique experiences I've ever had reading a book, because they're talking like people. This is the most natural dialogue I have ever heard in a comic. Again, as I said, he's eventually over the years taken that so far that now his dialogue doesn't really sound all that natural, and it does sound like, well, as I said, Bendis speak. But back then, holy cow, it was insane to me to see someone actually write like someone would actually put in there the little things that people say in their dialogue that they don't even realize that they're saying, but it makes it sound so much more natural. He would put in there things like repetition, which again, he overuses that these days, but back then, yeah, that's a thing that people do. They will often repeat themselves, just phrasing it differently. He's one of the first guys I ever noticed actually doing that with his dialogue in books. He's the first guy I ever noticed actually putting ums and ers in people's dialogue, and I was like, oh wow, that's actually how people talk. Wow, he's actually kind of nailing this. And yeah, it made it one of the most human versions of Peter Parker I've ever read. And speaking of making these characters feel more real, speaking of giving them more humanity, let's go into the next big thing they did, which was the Alias series, which eventually became known as Jessica Jones for Marvel's Max line. He helped kick off the Max line, which I've always kind of hoped would stick around, because I like the idea of Marvel doing more adult-oriented books that just happen to take place within the Marvel Universe. I think that a lot of great stories have been told in their Max line, and a lot of people just kind of ignore it and have forgotten that it even existed. But yeah, there's been a lot of great stuff to come out of the Max books. And when he came in here with his Jessica Jones run, he came in here and showed us, okay, it's not all bright, happy sunshine times with the comic book characters. He told a really dark, tormented story of this character who was so messed up in so many ways that you don't see in normal superhero books, but it wasn't in an alternate reality. Like I said, he did really dark stories in Powers, but before he came over to Marvel, that was over at Image Comics. But this was in the Marvel Universe. She ran into other Marvel characters. They referenced things that were going on in their own books, and then you would see the really dark stuff that Jessica Jones was going through. You would see the really adult stuff that she would be doing in her series, and it would actually make you think, oh shoot, man, comics, I remember there was a period of time in which a lot of people were asking, should comics even be considered for kids anymore? And the thing that they would point at is Jessica Jones. And before I go any further, yes, comics should still be for kids. That was a dumb argument for anyone to ever make. But what I'm saying is, it's kind of crazy that he had such a big impact with the Alias book that it got that conversation going. One of the things that I always loved about Marvel Comics specifically was I always felt that their characters were more human. And I'm not saying anything against the humanity or the characters of DC Comics characters. What I'm saying is that Marvel characters always used to deal with more real world issues. I always tended to really enjoy that. And when Jessica Jones came around, that was one that said, yeah, we deal with all real world issues. There's some really dark stuff that goes on in the world. And hey man, if this is a world full of superheroes, it would get talked about. It would happen to us. And I just remember being stunned by that series. It was unlike anything I had ever read. It really did kind of expand my mind to the possibilities of comics, especially comics that have to do with superheroes. I mean, I wasn't even really reading indie books at that time, and that was the closest thing that I had ever experienced up to that point that had to do with indie books. And yeah, man, that might be the reason why I'm such a big indie comic fan today. In fact, speaking of indie comics, as I said, when Bendis came on board, a lot of the people that Marvel or DC would hire would be people who kind of specialized in superhero comics. It wasn't the really weird, freaky indie guys, but Bendis came in here with an adult-only superhero cop book, and he got put on Spider-Man and knocked it out of the park. He got put on Daredevil, which I'm about to talk about in a second, and man, did he really knock that out of the park. And if you look at comics today, a lot of the people that Marvel and DC hire are the weird indie guys. It's the people who do their own freaky thing over at Image or over at some other company, and it makes them go, oh shoot, well, if they could do that on this book about X, Y, and Z, what could they do with ABC? If this is some guy who wrote a book about a town full of serial killers, what could he do with The Flash? Like, that is not a question anyone would have asked before Bendis got into comics, but because he just blew the doors off at Marvel when he came in, the next 20 years have basically been people going, okay, yeah, let's find the next really weird indie guy, because he's gonna do something special with our superheroes. But okay, I briefly alluded to his run on Daredevil, but we really need to delve into that more, because a lot of people are going to point at Ultimate Spider-Man and talk about how it changed up the industry. A lot of people are going to point at Jessica Jones and Alias and talk about how they changed up the industry. A lot of people are going to point at the things that he did after Daredevil and how that changed up the industry. I think his run on Daredevil made a huge impact on the industry, and nobody really talks about that. People talk about how great it was. I mean, hell, I talk about how great it was. Even though you guys know I am not the biggest fan of Bendis, I will gladly point at his run at Daredevil and say, that may very well be the best run anyone has ever had on Daredevil. It was a fantastic book. And if you want to know more about my feelings towards that book later on today on the Thorgy's Pick Show, we are going to be spotlighting it. So spoiler alert for what I'm talking about on that episode. But the reason why I say it changed up the industry is because Ultimate Spider-Man, it's great, but it was an alternate reality, and it was him still kind of telling a story that we had seen before. It's Peter Parker, it's Uncle Ben, it's Aunt May. Granted, he's telling it in his own unique way, but it was still a story we had heard before. Jessica Jones, that was a very bold book, but it was in its own unique line of books that were designed to be about that specific stuff that he was talking about in that book. So it was still kind of separated from the main Marvel continuity. Marvel still wasn't allowing Bendis to come in here and just do whatever he wanted to with their established characters. In fact, a lot of people don't even know this, but Jessica Jones was not originally its own original character. Jessica Jones was originally Jessica Drew. A lot of people don't know that he went in there with a pitch for a Spider-Woman book, and they said, no way in hell are we letting you do that with an established character. If you want to do that, fine, but you have to create your own character. So instead of writing a book about Jessica Drew, a detective superhero, he wrote a book about Jessica Jones, a detective superhero. Yeah, he didn't really even try to hide that one. He really wanted to make it clear, listen, this was my original idea for this book, and they said no. But when it came to his run on Daredevil, that is the first time that I can point to him on a book saying, how far can I go with this? Because Daredevil was an established character with a big fan base, and he came in here and made a change to that character that was not something that you could just sweep under the rug. It was something that would impact him forever. He told a story where a mobster working under the Kingpin found out that the Kingpin knew that Matt Murdock was Daredevil, and he decided, oh, why are you just hiding this? Why aren't you telling the world? And then he goes out there and tells the world. On the front page in the newspaper is Matt Murdock as Daredevil, and that was a story that rocked Daredevil for years, even long after Bendis left that book. That to me is the first time that you can really point to Bendis going, I'm going to take this toy that you've been keeping on the shelf and I'm going to completely customize it in my own way. And yeah, he continued to do that with other books from that point forward, and you can point to other people in the industry now kind of having the guts to go, I kind of want to try and do that too. I want to try and spice this up in completely new ways. I mean, just think about some of the best runs that you have seen on characters at Marvel over the past couple of years. Tom King's run on Vision, Jeff Lemire's run on Moon Knight, Saladin Ahmed's run on Black Bolt. Heck, you can even go back a couple of years before that, Matt Fraction's run on Hawkeye. These were all books that completely changed up these established characters. They did really risky things with these characters and showed them in brand new lights. And they're not the kind of things that you can just ignore, not the kind of things that you can just go, yeah, well, that wasn't a thing with that character. We're going back to the way they were before that and just pretending it didn't exist. No, there's stuff that really did reshape these characters, especially in the eyes of the readers. And when you think about the guy who kind of kicked that off in the modern era, the guy who came in here and said, yeah, none of this stuff is sacred. I can tear all of it down whenever I want to try and build a better story. It was Bendis on Daredevil. And I know somebody is going to hear me describing Bendis' run on Daredevil and the massive impact they made on that book, and they're going to think that what I'm saying is, oh, before that run on Daredevil, no one came in here and tried to change these characters forever. They came in here and just kind of treaded water for a while, just didn't try and rock the boat. They just basically tried to get to the end of their run. No, not at all. Writers have always tried to change these characters. They've always tried to make an impact on these characters' lives. However, there's a massive difference between what we were seeing before Bendis' run on Daredevil and what we started seeing after that. Because after that, almost every creator came onto these books and said, okay, what massive change can I make? What's the huge impact I can leave? What's the footprint that I can leave on this book that people will always be able to look at and go, oh yeah, that's what that creator did on there. We started seeing much larger change happening to these characters after Bendis' run on Daredevil, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Bendis came in here and said, hey man, it's time to really change these characters up. It's time to start rocking the boat. Which brings me to the biggest impact he has had on any book he ever worked on. His run on the Avengers. Now you guys know that I was a die-hard fan of the Avengers. I love that team. And Bendis came on here and immediately killed off like half the team, destroyed the mansion, and revealed at the end of that entire storyline that was the Scarlet Witch, one of their own members, who had gone insane, who caused all this to happen. I wasn't a fan of that. Yeah, as I've said, even though today we're praising Bendis, there's stuff he does that I'm not really the biggest fan of. And that was the first time that I read a Bendis story and I heard that record scratch. I went, wait, what? Hold on. Bendis is perfect at everything he does. What the hell is he doing here? And yeah, I was not a fan of the direction he decided to take the Avengers. However, this leads into, again, the massive impact that he left at Marvel and on the comic book industry. Because I said that he changed everything for Daredevil, but that was one character. The Avengers were part of the entire Marvel universe. They were little bits and pieces of the entire Marvel universe all crammed into one team, and they reached out and affected the rest of the Marvel universe. So when he came in here and said, I'm going to change everything forever, and nothing will ever be the same, oh my god, someone meant it. Yeah, he came in there, changed the Avengers forever, and it still to this day is not what it was. The Avengers have never returned back to being what they were before Bendis' run on that book. And that is why I say his run on the Avengers is going to be his biggest impact that he has left on the comic book community for two reasons. One, it's because, listen, I love the old Avengers. I miss the old Avengers. I always want the old Avengers to return, but I'm not stupid. The old Avengers didn't quite sell all that much. They sold fine, but considering this is supposed to be Marvel's flagship book, their biggest superhero team, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, they weren't Earth's highest selling book. No. The Avengers, in fact, pretty much throughout my entire lifespan up until that point, had never been the highest selling book at Marvel. That was always X-Men, Spider-Man, some other book out there. Bendis came in here and changed everything on that title, including the roster, by putting characters like Luke Cage, Spider-Man, Wolverine on the team. He told completely different new stories with the Avengers, and all of a sudden, it sold like gangbusters. It became one of Marvel's most popular books for years. Everyone was talking about the Avengers. Everyone wanted to read it. So yeah, he did turn the Avengers into a massive, iconic book over at Marvel. I might have problems with what the book was, but man, it was a huge, massive hit. And he got onto that book in 2004. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Iron Man, came out in 2008, meaning that they were filming it in 2007. Roughly 3 years after he got into that book, means still at the time when that book was selling high and everyone was talking about that book. Now, I'm not coming in here and saying that Brian Michael Bendis caused the Marvel Cinematic Universe to happen, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a massive risk. It was back then, still kind of is until this day, but the fact that Disney was willing to go, okay, so you want us to make several films about other characters leading up to one film about this superhero team. Well, is that superhero team that popular? Is it that big of a thing that it would make sense for us to come in here and do that? Is it so huge that it would be worth that risk? I think, honestly, if Bendis had have come in here and shown the Avengers can be that big of a seller, can be that popular, yeah, man, I don't think Disney would have jumped at that. Again, I'm not saying that you can draw a line directly from A to B on Bendis' run on the Avengers directly causing the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you can go from A to B to C to D on that one. I don't think it is that crazy of an argument to come in here and say that Bendis left such a big impact on the Avengers that, yeah, man, he made Disney realize, oh, maybe we actually should follow this. Maybe it actually would be worth risking something like this. But the other reason why I say Bendis' run on the Avengers will be the biggest impact that he has left on the comic book industry is because, like I said, with Avengers Disassembled, he came in here and said, I'm going to change everything forever. And then he did. And then all of that led into House of M, where he said, no, you thought that was change. This is change. I'm going to come in here and change stuff even more. And man, House of M, that book blew my mind. I was stunned by that book. And this was back at the time when the internet was not what it is today. There were not thousands of comic book websites out there where you could go for more information. Facebook wasn't even really a thing. There weren't even really many Facebook groups dedicated to comic books back then. If you wanted to talk about comic books on the internet, you had to go and find the weird dark part of the internet that no one really went on. Some weird forum that was a spin-off of another forum that was a spin-off of another forum. Yeah, nobody wanted to go and talk about comics on that part of the web. And I didn't have any friends in the real world at that time who read comic books, so I had to go to my non-comic book reading fans at the time and just go, no, you don't understand what a big deal this is. This is so amazing. I have to tell you all the great reasons why this is such a really good book. And they were just like, okay. Who's the Scarlet Witch? Wait, Magneto's in this, right? I know that guy. He was in that movie that I saw. Okay, yeah, I think I'm following you on this, so I apologize to all of those guys from the past who basically were bored out of their mind with me talking to them about what this book was about. But yeah, I was blown away by that book, and it did indeed change everything forever. And he didn't stop with that. He kept going from one book to another, just changing everything forever, oftentimes leading into giant, massive events. There was Secret Invasion that came out, and then that led into Dark Reign, where Norman Osborn was now running S.H.I.E.L.D., or what was S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time. And then that led into Siege, and then that led into another event, that led into another thing, and it was just one massive event after another, everything coming in here and completely changing the landscape of the Marvel Universe. And I know a lot of people are going to say, haven't you made videos in the past how you've talked about how that's a negative thing because it's now caused a feeling of instability in the comic book industry because nothing ever stays the same for long enough for us to grab an attachment to it? Haven't you said that people are getting tired of these giant massive events and that's causing readers to start dropping off of these books? or they only buy the massive events and that causes them to not read the regular series. Yes, I have said that. Now, in 2018, he started this with Avengers Disassembled in 2004, and for almost a decade, this worked like gangbusters. Yes, I want to come in here and point at the negatives of this. I want to come in here and point at how this kind of constant event fatigue is actually damaging the comic book industry right now. But man, if something works for a decade, I can't be that mad at it. Yes, I'm mad at them for continuing it. I'm mad at them for not knowing when to stop doing this stuff. Seems like after Secret Wars, that would have been the perfect time to finally go, okay, that was enough. We never have to touch this stuff for like another good 5 years. But no, man, that's what the comic book industry was, and that's what was a huge success in the comic book industry for almost a decade. And yeah, it's all pretty much thanks to Bendis. And like I said, even though I say it was a success for that decade, and now these days it's kind of hurting the comic book industry, it hasn't stopped. It's still going. It's still a non-stop just string of events one after another, because that's what the comic book industry is now these days. That is what, listen, I'd love to come in here and go, oh, it's still just a fad. No, man. When something has been going on for 14 years, it's not a fad. It is a massive change in the way that these books work. And yeah, that is all very much directly related to Bendis. I know a lot of people are going to go, well, what about Civil War? He didn't do Civil War, and that was the really big one. Yes, Civil War was the one that got everybody's attention and made everyone, even non-comic book fans, start talking about. But Civil War wouldn't have been possible unless Bendis had come in there and broken down the door with Avengers Disassembled and House of M. That's what got people going, oh, shoot. Let's try something really big. And then after that was a success, they turned back to Bendis with Secret Invasion. It was like, okay, keep this ball rolling, keep it going, man. So yes, when you look out at the landscape of events that make up comic books these days, I know people are going to say, well, it's really just Marvel. DC doesn't do that. DC does that. DC doesn't do it quite as much as Marvel, but they're starting to do it as much as Marvel. Yeah, man, that's what the name of the game is these days. Massive events, and not just these days. As I said, for 14 years, that has been the name of the game. And it was Bendis that did that. And again, as much as I would love to come in here and point at some of the negatives that that has caused, I've also come in here and said comic books need to figure out a way to compete with modern media. It needs to realize that's how fast entertainment moves these days. That's how many other options we have for entertainment out there these days. Comic books need to figure out a way to compete with that. Bendis came in here at a time when the entertainment industry really was starting to change, when the internet really was starting to mix things up, when people really were starting to go, oh, I can get infinite amounts of entertainment from every direction now. Okay, well, I have so many options. Why do I need comic books? And in a way, you can point to him causing the giant string of events that have become what comics are these days as him coming in here and going, this is how we have to compete. And you know something? It worked for a long freaking time. And that is why I can point at Bendis and say, this guy kind of is the father of the modern era of comics. Not just because he completely changed the landscape of what comics are these days, and comics continue to kind of still be that, but also because for years, he kind of was Marvel's new Stan Lee. And I don't mean because he came in here and created a whole bunch of characters, because I know someone in the comments is going to say, well, you know, it was really Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko who were creating those characters. Stan Lee really just took all the credit. That's a whole argument for another day, and I'm not getting into it here. But Stan Lee, the thing that no one can argue against, is that the reason why he really was the father of Marvel Comics, the reason why he was able to come in here and claim to be the guy who helped shape what comic books are, is because he's the guy who realized the importance of getting in front of the camera. The reason why, even though there's all the controversies about who really created what, I still point to Stan Lee and say, yeah, that guy is the reason why comic books are what they are, is because comic books weren't mainstream. Hell, comic books never really were all that mainstream. But Stan Lee was the guy who realized, I'm going to go on the news, I'm going to go on talk shows, I'm going to go on game shows, I'm going to be in movies, I'm going to be in front of every camera that you can get me in front of so I can talk about these books. I'm going to come up with catchphrases that people will remember. I'm going to hype the crap out of Spider-Man. I am going to tell everyone about these products. And listen, man, you can be the most creative, talented genius in the world. If you don't know how to promote your stuff, Doesn't really matter. Stan Lee is the guy who knew how to promote his stuff. Bendis is the modern day Stan Lee, because no creator out there knows how to promote the heck out of their stuff quite like Brian Michael Bendis does. Again, going back to when Bendis announced that he was leaving Marvel, and all those people said, oh my goodness, who does Marvel even have now? The fact that Bendis was that big of an iconic figure that people didn't even know who else was working at Marvel at the time, despite the fact that, again, most Marvel fans were kind of getting tired of Brian Michael Bendis at the time, that really speaks to how good this guy is at promoting himself, at getting people to talk about his product, which is the most important thing about making comics. And that brings me to the last big change that Bendis brought to Marvel and to the comic book industry as a whole, Miles Morales. Now, I'm not going to explain to you the backstory of Miles Morales and tell you who he is and what universe he was created in and how he moved into the Marvel universe. You guys all know that, alright? Everybody knows who Miles Morales is, which is a big deal. The fact that everybody knows who Miles Morales is, a brand new character, is actually a really big deal. It is so hard to introduce new characters this day and age. The last really big new character that was created was Deadpool back in the freaking 90s. It's so hard to create a brand new character who sticks around and gets readers interested in them, and Bendis was able to do that. But I'm not going to just come in here and tell you that the reason why he was able to do that was because, oh, well, it was a really well-written book, and people actually liked the character of Miles. Yes, all that is true. Even I, a person who over the years has gotten sick of Bendis' style of writing, can point to those first couple years on the Miles Morales book and go, those were really damn good books. That was some of the best stuff that Bendis has written in his career, and he created a wonderful character with the character of Miles Morales. But the reason why Miles Morales was important, the reason why it had a huge impact on the comic book industry is because of what Miles meant to people. When Miles Morales was first announced, I looked at it and went, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, I really didn't care one way or another because they were creating him for the Ultimate Universe, and they were creating him at a point in time when the Ultimate Universe was kinda done. The Ultimate Universe was just grabbing anything it could think of to try and increase its sales because that entire universe was on its way out. I mean, I read Ultimate Spider-Man for years, pretty much for the entire run, but I stopped reading it a couple years right before this, simply because it was trying everything it could think of just to keep that book going. And yeah, man, it had lost that magic. So when they killed off the Ultimate Universe version of Peter Parker, this was a character who I spent a decade with. I looked at that and was like, yeah, okay, whatever. All right, it's fine, the universe is done, I don't care anymore. So then when they come in here and say, oh, well, we're going to create this brand new character, Miles Morales, I was like, I really don't care about anything in the Ultimate Universe. But then I saw the impact he had. I saw what he meant to people. Like, you heard all these stories online of people talking about how wonderful that book was and what this character meant to them. And a couple of years after he was introduced, I started working in a comic book store, and I saw firsthand the impact that this character had on people. I saw how passionate people were about this. I saw people coming in the store going, yeah, I want to start reading comics, and I've heard this is the character I want to get into. I've researched him, he sounds really cool, he is a character that means a lot to me, and I haven't even read the book yet, so I want to start reading it. And yeah, those fans kept coming back. They weren't those like one and done fans who were like, well, I heard about this thing, I'm gonna check it out, and I've checked it out. Okay, I'm done. No, this was a character who got people to start becoming comic book fans. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Miles Morales represented a group out there that didn't have a Spider-Man. They didn't have heroes like Peter Parker out there who were really representing them in comics. Bendis came in here and gave that group of readers a hero who they could point to and go, you know what, I can see kind of myself in this character. I can kind of identify with this character. He speaks to me. He means something to me. And that was great. As I said, I got to see that firsthand with people in my store. I got to see that reaction from fans who got incredibly excited about that. And when you look at comic books today, you can definitely see that they are making a stronger push to represent other groups out there, that they are trying to create heroes for all different readers out there, and that's fantastic. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Bendis came in here with Miles Morales and said, this works. This is a thing that people want to read about, and it's very important that characters like this exist. And it wasn't just him. There were other creators out there really pushing for these types of characters. I mean, you can look at Kelly Sue DeConic's run on Captain Marvel and how that spoke to so many people out there, and how that eventually led into the Kamala Khan Miss Marvel book. Then that really spoke to a large group of people out there. However, yeah, as I said earlier, Bendis was the Stan Lee of Marvel at the time. Bendis was the guy who knew how to come in here and promote the crap out of something. He knew how to get people talking about a character, and that's one of the reasons why Miles Morales was such a massive success, and why the success of Miles Morales kind of stretched out into all corners of the comic book industry. Miles Morales was that thing that made comic book companies realize, oh shoot, maybe we should be creating more diverse characters. Maybe we should be trying to create characters that represent wider ranges of audiences. And as I said, I freaking worked in a store where I could see the impact of this. I saw people get emotional over this stuff. You never really realize, just from looking around on the internet, the impact that characters like Miles Morales have on people until you see it in person. Until you can see grown adults getting excited like you have never seen them get excited before over a brand new character like this. Until you see little kids coming into your store going, no, that's the one I want to read about. It's like, oh my goodness, that is a huge moment. That is something that really does make you go, wow, these characters are important. It is important to keep creating new characters like this. And Bendis is the guy who really made people wake up to that. So in the end, yes, I'm not the biggest fan of Bendis these days. I kind of get nervous when he gets put on a book. In fact, I'm really nervous for his upcoming run on Superman. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to come in here and deny the amazing impact that he had on Marvel and the comic book industry as a whole. He changed so much about this industry, almost all of it for the better. I mean, characters like Miles Morales helped spawn a new generation of heroes that speak to a new generation of audiences out there. He came in here at a time when comic books kind of needed to figure out how to compete with the rising new forms of entertainment out there, and he's the guy who really allowed them to keep up. Yes, it was all these massive giant events that are changing everything, which these days has kind of led to a problem, but hey man, it kept this industry so successful for a freaking decade. He also came in here with books like Ultimate Spider-Man and really re-energized fans for that character. He got people to be fans of Spider-Man all over again, especially for the younger days of Spider-Man, which at that point in time, a lot of people were kind of forgetting about. He also came in here and kind of changed up how we tell superhero stories. Yes, the human side of a superhero story was always important, especially over at Marvel, but now it kind of became the most important part of it. It became something that people were even more invested in than the superhero side of it. He also came in here with books like Daredevil and Alias and just created brand new stories for characters that we never thought we would see. He created brand new tones that just weren't done back then. He also helped break down the door for all these fresh new indie creators to come in, which now they're the big names in comic books. So yes, Brian Michael Bendis, even though you guys have heard all my complaints about him before in the past, I needed to come in here and make a video praising all the good he's done. If you guys have watched this channel long enough, then you know that I praise more stuff in the comic book industry than I ever wag a finger at. I think there's amazing stuff happening in the comic book industry today, and so much of that is thanks to Brian Michael Bendis. He's the guy who started so many of the things that are right with comic books these days. So yes, to Brian Michael Bendis, I just want to come in here and give you one big final salute for everything that you did at Marvel. And good luck over at DC. Let's end the episode now before I have to think of any more nice things to say. But again, that's just me. Let me know what you guys have thought about Brian Michael Bendis' time at Marvel in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite story by Brian Michael Bendis was. Let's be positive here. I want to get some more positivity going in the comic book community. So let me know what your favorite Brian Michael Bendis story at Marvel was in the comments down below. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and you can always reach me online at Twitter, Tumblr, Twitch, at Professor Thorgy. And if you guys want to see me talk more about his run on Daredevil, come back later today for the Thorgy Picks episode in which I talk about the first trade of his Daredevil run. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time. Bye.